Hello, friends. Patrick McFarland here of the Liberty Weekly podcast. Welcome back for another episode. This one is episode 75. And on the line today, I have a very great guest. That is Raeford Davis. Raeford Davis is a former police officer and also, is it former Coast Guard, sir?
That's right. I was in the Coast Guard Reserves and spent some time active duty with them before I became a police officer.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, so I know that you've been on a lot of shows. This has been a long time coming, actually. I really wanted to talk to you for a while, and I'm super grateful for you to be on. So thanks so much for that. I had a chance at the University of Minnesota like a month ago. You spoke there on a video conference, and I was going to attend, but then I was like, oh, I could just have him on personally. So here you are.
Hey, that's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I do. That's with Students for Liberty. And I've done a few of those, and so it's nice to interact with young people and kind of challenge them a little bit. And I'm probably giving them a bit of a different perspective than what they're reading in college, and it's certainly different than what I heard when I got my criminal justice degree.
Yeah, and Charlie Gers over there at the University of Minnesota campus. I don't know if you recognize his name, but he's been on the show, and we're friends. So it's so cool for the circles to connect. You know what I mean?
That's great. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I know Charlie and have spoken with him, at length a few times. So
Cool.
that's great.
Yeah, and
that's how you build this liberty movement and everything. Anyway, it's just those connections and build those rings and those connections.
Well, it really once you get to be in the liberty movement, the world really shrinks, I think.
It does.
Yeah. So Raeford, why don't you just tell the audience a little bit about how you came around to these ideas?
Okay, yeah. So I was a former police officer. Before that, I spent time in the Coast Guard. I consider myself like a compassionate conservative. I have a criminal justice degree from a Christian university. I always wanted to do what was right and serve my community. I considered myself, kind of level-headed, not a real gung-ho or anything like that. And what a better way to do that than to become a police officer. I didn't become a cop, to crack skulls or to boost my ego. I wanted to bring honor and integrity to policing. That's what I wanted to do. And protect my community. There are vulnerable people, and there's men that need to to stand up and protect others. So there's that real kind of crime aspect to it. I spent 6 years in the city of North Charleston. It was considered the 8th most dangerous city at the time. 4 years on patrol, 2 years as a special victims unit detective. I made hundreds of arrests, many of them particularly, drug related, which I like to talk about a lot. And I really enjoyed it. But a lot of it just wasn't quite right. Something was off. And now, while everything I did was legal and justified and how I was trained, just something wasn't quite right. I was directing traffic, had a car accident, got hit by a truck, broke my leg. That's why I had to get out of policing. And it really, how did I become like an anarchist voluntarist? Well, it took me several years of reading Lou Rockwell with the Mises Institute, lots of different people and trying to understand from a law perspective, when is it okay to use force against another man? When is it okay to use that violence or to use that threat of force? And you see that our legal procedures and our police policies and use of force continuums were not satisfactory. And just from a legal perspective, well, it's very easy. Lots of things I did as a police officer were constitutional, but they just didn't seem right. And well, slavery was constitutional, yet fugitive slave patrol officers were horribly immoral, and any force they used to repatriate slaves was unjust, no matter how legal. So, that constitutional aspect kind of breaks down real quick. And with the use of force aspect, I could take and I saw a video of this recently. I could take the most minor of what I call non-crime offenses, such as a man who left his car idling in a 7-Eleven parking lot, and a police officer ends up arresting him for it. And as a police officer, I could, using our use of force continuum, legally, I could turn leaving your keys in the ignition into killing you. I could work that use of force and shoot you dead, and that would be justified. That never sat right with me. And then particularly, with the drug war and just arresting people for possession or and those type of things. And so when I saw all of that, but it wasn't until I got out, until I was able to quote unquote see and understand. It was almost like I was blinded and had this great, world open up to me. And so now, I've been on that path. It took me a couple of years. Man, it's hard on your ego. Wow, I was wrong. And I harm people and stuff. And that's difficult, particularly because I was well-intentioned, like most cops are. That's a big blow to your ego and difficult to accept. And then I had to turn around and actually say it out loud. And then I get on the internet. I get on shows like you, Patrick, with Liberty Weekly, and admit this. Yes, I harm people unjustly. Not an easy process. So I found that anarchist and voluntarist, the non-aggression principle really spoke to me. It's never okay to initiate violence or force. Yes, you can protect yourself. If someone tries to rob you, you can defend yourself. If someone tries to rob another person, you can intervene on their behalf and physically subdue that person. Yes, of course. But the moment you become the one that initiates violence, that's when your actions are immoral. Fundamental moral principles of human interaction in that non-aggression principle. It's never okay to initiate that violence or even threaten violence. And then you get in the whole idea of taxation and the idea of the state as this arbiter of what is right or wrong. And that's why I'm now a voluntarist anarchist talking on your show.
Yeah, no, that's such a great journey. And was it, so it kind of sounds like you always had it in the back of your mind that it was.
I did. Of course, huge cognitive dissonance, just like typical, liberals and conservatives are good on some issues and then horrible on others. And I was kind of the same thing. Man, I was a huge Ron Paul fan. I even voted for Harry Brown, like before I became a cop. This is one of those, just consider myself, conservative libertarian kind of guy, but, just really had no clue and no real understanding of really what that meant.
Yeah. And, so one thing that you said that really keyed into me was just the idea that a lot of people approach this wanting to do good. And this is what I struggle with personally, is that I know a lot of police officers and I know a lot of corrections officers and I know a lot of people in the court system and I know a lot of district attorneys. They're good people. They're not bad people. They're just doing bad things. So how do we try to show them that in a respectful way and in a polite way?
Well, it's not easy. And so how do I do that? Well, whenever you speak the truth, you're right, but you've got to kind of work people's psyche and stuff a little bit and kind of understand where they're coming from. And what is your goal? Is your goal just to rebuke them? Okay. You're right to do that. As a police officer, I look at, try to everything I say, it's like I try to speak to myself, my former ignorant self from 10 years ago, and how I would kind of tweak my brain. You've got this huge cognitive dissonance, and we've been inculcated with this our entire lives, our education, everything we see on TV and what we learn. American awesomeness, this wonderful democracy. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and whatever the Supreme Court justices say, oh, that's right. Whatever, whatever their opinions, and you just, that's just crammed into your head, into your history books, all intentional, of course. So I understand where they come from. So how do you do that? Well, there's always something. And everyone that's in policing or law enforcement, they know that there's some part of government. If you ask them, is there anything that government does that's just horribly unjust and immoral? And they'll always come up with something,
Yeah.
And so what you've got to do is you've got to find that and find that thing that really bugs them. And then you got to pull on that thread for them. You've got to tweak them. Now, see, if you confront them and say, the state is immoral and everything you do, you're just this horrible, violent status thug, which in a way is true.
Yeah.
But you tell someone that, and they're just going to shut down right there. And as a matter of fact, even if they maybe agree with you a little bit, you're going to hurt their ego so much, and that they're going to automatically start looking for things to oppose you with. And so you're not going to change their minds like that. You've got to find that little thing, and you've got to pull on that thread. It's huge. It took me years, and it was a very emotional process. And so you're not going to do one tweet or one little podcast or one little 5-minute conversation in a doorway and change their mind, or a whole paradigm of or matrix that the entire society is built on, however fraudulent it may be. So you find that, and I've used the drug war. That's that, and there's lots of others, but I've used that because conservatives and liberals, conservatives can kind of understand that personal liberty issue, and that kind of Fourth Amendment exception, and that overreaching government input into your lives. And then liberals, they see that human cost, and just how destructive arresting and incarcerating people. And the liberals also get the really historically racist aspect of it, and just how that's been used to divide and create an artificial dialectic that our leaders use to keep all of us at each other's throats, and so you use that to pull on that thread. And if somebody, and if you can go even a little lower and say like marijuana, and it's easy for cops, they'll agree with you very quick. Marijuana prohibition's dumb. We shouldn't be doing it. Most cops smoke pot, like I did before I became a cop. We understand just how evil it is. I mean, how just idiotic prohibition is, and we understand that it's not even really constitutional, even though they say so. And we know it's not working, and we just have no business doing it. And so you can kind of pull on that. Now and then you get them to understand that and to admit it and say it out loud. And then you talk about other substances and say, hey, well, cocaine and Ritalin are pretty much the same thing. So why is one okay for 8-year-olds and the other one is just as evil as can be? And hey, regarding cocaine, did you know that like Oliver North and the government, like and Barry Seal, like flew, and George Bush and Bill Clinton and Mena, Arkansas, they flew tons of it in and sent it out throughout the community. And people are like, oh yeah, that's right, you know. And so even if you think coke's bad, you know, this whole prohibition thing is just a racket at best. So just little ways like that you pull on it. And I like to really focus on that moral aspect of prohibition enforcement, where drug use can be harmful. So people are like, well, drugs are bad. And, you know, when I see people overdose and destroy their lives on them. And so should society, and so people will say, well, you're an anarchist, so you say people shouldn't regulate drugs at all? And that's not true. But should you use violence? So drug use and sales and stuff, that can have a negative impact on people's lives, but they're not robbing anyone. Drug use and even sales and trade is adult consensual activity. And so it's not a violent activity. When you, as a police officer, you resort to that violence, that's how you violate that non-aggression principle. That's how you become unjust and immoral, because when you resort to that. Now, if somebody uses drugs and you're like, hey, you know what? You're not coming into my house with that. I'm not going to do business with you. I'm not going to hire you. Those type of things, then that's perfectly legitimate, and I support that in a lot of ways. But it's that moment that you resort to using violence, as just a normal person. Would it be okay for me to go into strangers' home, kick in their door, shove a gun in their face, drag them out, take their possessions, shoot them if they resist, and lock them in a cage because they smoke pot, they grow it, possess it? Would it be right for me as a citizen to do that? No, that would be wrong. So why is it okay as a cop? How do those rights transfer? And the answer is it doesn't. Police officers have no extra rights. They have extra responsibilities. And so you can kind of pull on that illegitimacy and just get people thinking about those type of subjects, which we don't really think about. And certainly you're not going to be taught that in school.
Yeah, and so what I've really been struggling with is, and I think once you get to that moral point, you try and hit them with like the economics of prohibition by Mark Thornton is a great book that I've read, and illustrate to them. Once you get the foot in the door with the emotional, moral argument. But what I've really struggled with, Raeford, is just the and I had a correspondence with a veteran that listened to one of my shows and had some comments about what I said, and it was very helpful. But he emphasized that what you just said is that you're going to turn people off if you come out with, taxation is theft and you're the jackboot thugs of the state. And we don't want to turn them off. We just want to talk to them. And one thing I really wanted to get away from was making objective moral statements about them, generalizations that, I mean, you could, and this is the crux of my own cognitive dissonance, if you will, is, well, on one hand, we have the Robert Higgs argument that there are no good police officers or military because objectively they violate people's rights in a socialized way. They'll go invade countries aggressively. They'll violate people's property rights without just cause. But at the same time, I think there is a lot to be said about, well, let's not just cast condemnation on a whole bunch of people, but look at them as individuals and look at what they've dealt with and what they've had to go through. So anything about that?
Yeah, I agree. And, Robert Higgs is right. And you see that quote go around, and I know myself from 10 years ago would look at that and go, that's just dumb as dirt.
Yeah, right.
And that's, you're an idiot. That's what I would think. And so I would shut down, right there. And so I look at it as on levels, on different kind of just a basic, like a practical level or something, for a police officer in particular. if you are a police officer and somebody calls you help, people just broke into my house and stole all my stuff, and you go down there and you grab them and arrest them and get people's stuff back. You're telling me that I'm some kind of thug for doing that? Are you insane? No. So on that level, yes, you are legitimate and moral to do that. Again, other things, some mala prohibita laws, where you just go around and you go into people's homes and arrest them because they've got drugs or any other type of vice or something like that. Then again, you become the aggressor. That's a little bit different. Then you have the whole idea, well, taxation kind of is theft. And so as a police officer, you are paid by that. And so that kind of delegitimizes even your legitimate services that you provide. That's a different level. And then I would get it, even kind of more from a spiritual level, from the whole idea of government. This is a little different. Look, there is a basic fundamental moral right and wrong regarding human interaction. There's right and wrong, and those are inviolate. Your understanding of them can't change it. What you think, what your religion tells you, it does not change those fundamental moral principles of human interaction. And that's what government does. Government says that something that would normally be immoral or wrong is now okay. So it would not be okay for me as a citizen or a normal human being to go violently beat the crap out of someone because they decide to smoke pot. But the government says, oh, yes, no, it is legal. It's okay for us to do it, and it's right. And so how does government have that power? Well, it comes from the people. Well, the people don't have that power. So how are they able to transfer they don't have to something they don't have to you or to the government? It can't be done. And I think that also kind of from a godly and spiritual perspective, that's how you disobey God, and that's how you take the Lord's name into vain. And it's almost like the Old Testament golden calf type of thing, where you say that this government, it can change God's will, what God has established, or natural law or cosmic karma established as right and wrong, that this magic document can change things, and you enslave yourself. You deny your own free will when you say, oh, this absolves me of any sin. And so kind of from a religious or spiritual perspective, the idea of the state is illegitimate. So there's kind of like those different levels that you can kind of talk to people about depending on where they're at.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate you bringing in that perspective too. It reminds me of memes that I'll see from Stephen Rose over at Anarcho-Christian that I really appreciate too. And so I did some public defender work in the cities here for a while, and a lot of what I did see was lots of petty traffic violations, and so people just coming into court day after day. They're broke, they're poor, they need to get to work, but they're saddled with all these fines and unpaid. And it just, I guess what I'm getting at is that I see legal professionals and I also see police officers grappling with these fundamental economic problems. And I think they do know that the system is fundamentally flawed, but I don't know what it is, if the problem is so much bigger than themselves or they can't identify it, or... We've had this
system for generations. And so it's hard to see a world without it and to really comprehend. This type of system has been set up intentionally like this. And so and you talk about traffic laws and stuff and say, well, they apply to everyone, but it's kind of it's the poor, it's just, the normal class and the mass that it really harms. And it's really directed at. And and also specific groups of people. And you get into that whole kind of racism and certain minorities that are specifically targeted. And so we've always known that a lot of these nuisance laws were always, when they were developed in the 1800s, early 1900s, were always developed to target certain groups. And they say, well, the laws apply to everyone, but we're going to direct our enforcement to these particular communities, these neighborhoods, and they never leave. And so they say, well, nobody should, nobody should not use their turn signal, but look at what neighborhood they're enforcing those in more often, and then using that as a pretext to use in the drug wars. Obviously the same thing. To specifically directed at certain communities, and when you police and you patrol these communities and you write these tickets like this, the no window tint, the registrations and the insurance, and all these other just kind of inane violations that have some certain legitimate basis in safety, but when you use it, you've turned it around and used it like as a tool of oppression and control. And that's what policing has always been. When, the modern policing from, Sir Robert Peel, these were the pacification forces that were started up in Ireland, and to police, the poor working class and the workhouses of London and in Scotland. They've always been directed to control the masses. And so they do that with these, these fines and just the whole process of going to court and paying a ticket, having to take off work and going back and forth. It's just an excessive criminalization.
It is
never ending crucible. And so you could say, well, he didn't use his turn signal. Okay. You're just looking at it from a tiny soda straw and just don't understand the total entire encompassing malevolent purpose of these court systems. And they do some legitimacy. Yeah, we work with shoplifting charges and little thefts and assaults, but that's just a veneer of legitimacy, and they don't even deal with those very well. And that was one thing I noticed, so I, as a cop, I worked, patrol and, had a lot to do with kind of drug enforcement and using those petty charges and pretextual stops to quote unquote, help these neighborhoods.
But you're really just searching for more.
Criminalizing. And the residents in the community, they've been kind of brainwashed the same way. So they're begging us to come do something. And they don't quite understand either. So they bring that whole oppression on themselves. And so we would do that. But now I saw, hey, this ain't right. And so I went into detective division, kind of our special victims unit, where I worked with a child abuse, child sexual assault, real crimes with real victims. That's what I wanted, to deal with and to focus on, and get myself and step away from that particularly that drug enforcement, which I knew wasn't right. But see, when I got there and saw how we dealt with child abuse and child sexual assault, we did a horrible job. Real victims were not given the proper investigations that they deserved. And we unnecessarily prosecuted a lot of people that were most likely innocent or would turn, like we call like a Romeo and Juliet offense, where, a 19-year-old boy has consensual sex with a 14-year-old girl. And well, that's illegal, and crucify this guy. And so I saw even the real crimes, and you look at just even statistics on clearance rates for law enforcement. You say, well, we need law enforcement because there's real crime. Well, murder. Yeah, we need cops for that, right? Clearance rate for murders in the United States is 62%. So that means close to 40% of all murders go, unsolved. And if you look at like property burglary is like 19%. Rapes and sexual assaults about 30%. So, and that's just a clearance rate that totally underestimates even like people you convict and stuff. Has anyone really been served? If you lock someone up, have you really helped that victim? Not really. And you're going to spend what, $40,000, $90,000 a year to incarcerate someone? Sure, he may deserve it, but you just really, you're going to use taxpayer money to do that. Again, it's just the whole criminal justice system, even with legitimate crimes, they do a terrible job, and it's just a huge self-perpetuating, incredibly expensive, monolithic system. And you'll see police officers do things like that. You talk about how do you deal with this stuff when you don't think it's right? Well, they kind of minimize their involvement. So you'll see cops do things like, well, they don't choose to go into drug enforcement. They'll go into burglary crimes. But as soon as you do that, you're not going to be promoted. I'm not comfortable with the drug war. I think it's really unjust, and this is counterproductive. You're not making it past corporal. You become a liability. You're gonna say that out loud, and so someone can, from the public, can say, hey, you've got your own officer saying what you're doing is counterproductive and fundamentally unjust. You open yourself up to a lot of liability and your department, so you become toxic. And a lot of cops get out, and they don't even quite understand why they're not comfortable with it. And so you just ask them, why'd you get out? Well, just kind of wasn't comfortable with it or whatever, this and that. They can't even really articulate why they've gotten out. I have a lot of police officers, former police officers, tell me kind of the same thing in confidence of why they got out.
Man, and that really kind of leads into the moral harm issue that you covered with Mance Raider on his show about veterans as well. And I did want to get into that because I was listening to your episode last night, and I've done some work on that with, and you probably recognize this guy's name, but Dave Grossman, his On Killing book. And so I do like a Liberation Library. I call it a documentary series where I'll do like a documentary on a book I've read. And have you read On Killing? I know you know who Dave Grossman is, but
yeah, I know who Dave Grossman is, and I've listened. I haven't read his stuff. I've read a little bit and listened to some of his talks online.
His Warrior Cop talk.
His Warrior Cop talk. About how, after you kill someone, that'll be the best sex you'll ever have.
Yeah.
I would have bought that stuff when I was a cop. He strokes your ego, he strokes guns, and he strokes your pecker too. He hits everything that a daggum 14-year-old boy digs. Yeah. And you're like, yeah, and he justifies all that, and but you look back from a humanitarian perspective, even a practical perspective, and you see just what a charlatan that guy is. He's like the personification of, Colonel Nathan Jessup from A Few Good Men. You want me on this wall, you need me on this wall kind of junk. And even with the character, Colonel, Jack Nicholson's character, Colonel Jessup, the code red that he ordered was illegal. But the stuff that Dave Grossman and this whole killology and this aggressive policing that they spout is legal. So I always think, if you look at the movie A Few Good Men, what if code reds were actually legitimate?
Yeah.
Then the whole movie would be different. Colonel Jessup would have been this unfairly maligned, tough guy. And Tom Cruise would have been this panty-waisted little weasel. And we'd all be cheering for Colonel Jessup when he got cleared of all charges.
Because he was just following orders.
Because he was doing what was legal.
Yeah.
And so that's what we have with cops. And so much of what they do is just horribly and you treat that, yeah, it's okay, man, get tough. And it's just horribly illegitimate. And guys like him. But see, I don't even think Dave Grossman believes a bunch of his junk. But he gets paid to do it. So of course he's going to be out there, and he gets promoted as some type of expert.
Yeah, and well, the thing that really got me is that in reading Killology, there are beautiful things in Killology that he uncovers. There are beautiful things about the human spirit, like mankind's inherent resistance towards taking fellow human life, and this is documented. He documents it throughout history that. Starting with General S.L.A. Marshall in World War II, he did a study of all of the soldiers and found that in any given confrontation, only 1 out of 5 would take any part with their weapons. Any part. And that, they do a lot of shooting over, purposely missing the enemy. And this was documented throughout history, and they realized it in World War II and then said, hey, we got a problem, is that our soldiers are not discharging their weapons in combat, much less even killing people. And so the military took this and they did reflexive fire training where you just shoot on reflex. And, now firing rates are about 98% or 99%. And it really just keyed me when you were speaking about moral injury. And so I wanted to ask you if you would, do you remember what you said to Mance Raider kind of about your work with veterans? Do you do work with veterans?
I do talk to them a bit, and, we have those same type of, the questions about the morality of use of force and how the government can the idea that it can give you license to legitimately kill someone is, that's a fraud. I try to kind of stick with policing because that's where I have credibility. And when I go start talking about like veterans issues and stuff, the first thing they're going to do, you ever been in combat? And I'm going to have to say no.
Yeah.
And so even if I'm right, they're not really going to listen to me. And so I try to kind of stick in, and that was what I would suggest to you or other people is you're going to have any area that you have credibility in, kind of stick to that and focus on that area. Yeah, as far as killing, well, that's exactly what Dave Grossman does. People are naturally don't want to kill and harm other folks, even when they have a legitimate right to do so. And so his entire process is to how to change people's minds and to think that they must, particularly in service of the government, as an armed government agent. That's exactly what his total process and everything that he does. And you've got to look that these institutions, psychology and psychiatry and our universities, all of these systems, particularly since World War II, that's what a lot of what they do is how to construct society and alter people's minds until they want to serve the government, that they want to go out there and kill and use violence against others, how to make people believe that it's the right thing to do and that they're honorable and just and heroic. And don't question your orders. You don't have to do that now. You just go and do it and you'll be honorable, and you have to do that. And so they use psychology, they use emotion, they twist religion in Romans 13 and how to get people to do that. And he's just one small part. And you can't even, when you're in it, you can't see it. It's not until you step out that you see the insanity of it.
Well, there's a couple things you brought up there that I really appreciated that I want to key in on. And one is just feeling like since we haven't been there, and this is why I really hesitate to, because I'm not a veteran. I was never in the military. I don't know what I'm talking about. When someone who hasn't killed is talking about killing, it's like a virgin talking about sex. And that's what Dave Grossman has stated in his book. And so I feel like a lot of people are hesitant to criticize, either a lot of people are hesitant to criticize or have these conversations because they feel like, oh, I was never there, therefore I have no opinion on it. And then other people just go way too far and say, you know, everyone is a baby killer who is a soldier or something like that. And so, yeah, it is hard, you know, when you haven't been in that situation. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that there is so much. We're talking about Dave Grossman. I mean, he was an Army Ranger, and even there you get the crossover between, you know, the military overseas and then them bringing that back home, and then the military culture pervading the policing culture. So I see, in my mind, I see these as very similar issues.
They are. Hey, so Dave Grossman, he's never been a cop. So what's he doing talking to police?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
He needs to stay in his lane. Get out of here. You know, yeah. And I want to talk about, look, governments don't act. Militaries don't act. Police don't act. Laws don't act. Orders do not act. Only human individuals act. And so any harm that you say, and I know we use the words government and they and systems and those type of things, and that's okay, just for convenience sake, but only men act. So human interaction, you know, it's not a drug law that's acting. It was me, Raeford Davis, who made that decision to take someone and drag them out of their car, put handcuffs on them, and lock them in a cage because they had pot. And it was me that brought that harm of that unjust law into physical manifestation. And so I bear the most moral responsibility for that harm. And the same thing with a soldier. He goes over to Iraq. Iraq is just, you know, the last Iraq war is just so obviously unjust. It was based on lies. It was based on just malicious greed. There was nothing legitimate, you know, in any kind of abstract self-defense justification that you can make. The entire war was immoral and unjust and malevolent. And so every man that put his boots on the ground in Iraq, no matter how little he did, even if he's a supply clerk, he doesn't even, you know, actually shoot anyone or go into anybody's home and round up their guns in Iraq or actually kill someone. Your actions were unjust. And it's you that bears that moral responsibility, because it's you that brought the resultant harm of those orders into physical manifestation. You were the one that actually inflicted that harm on that individual unjustly and created that harm. And so you bear that moral responsibility. And you can, you know, just following orders, never an excuse. You can't say, well, I didn't know. No, you should have known. You're a human being. You're a grown man. You have, you know, when I talked about free will, you have, that's what we're endowed with by our creator, you know, are these natural rights and the ability to choose right from wrong. And you have to take that responsibility. And you can't even deny that responsibility. You can say you can, but you can't. And that's where that moral injury, that moral suffering, you will suffer moral and spiritual, emotional consequences when you harm someone unjustly. And that's what we'll get in, you know, if you want to talk about, you know, this moral suffering and this high suicide rate in law enforcement and military. It's because they're the ones. And so you have to choose. You have to make that decision. Look, this law is unjust. You have the ultimate duty to not enforce it. You've got to make that decision for yourself. You can't, you're going to give that decision, about what you do right and wrong, particularly using violence against another man, to a politician? You're going to set your moral compass to a bunch of bureaucrats and then be surprised when you suffer this, this crisis of your conscience?
Yeah, that's heavy. Well, I really appreciate what you do, Raeford, and I hope you keep doing it, man. And I'm so glad that you came on the show today. These are so difficult topics to talk about, but I think so important for us to talk about. I mean, just trying to reach people and connect on that human level. So thanks so much for joining me today, man.
Okay. Yeah. Let me leave with a quote. This is Adam Kokesh. I like this quote. Most of us have not taken the time to consider the precise nature of freedom and its foundation in universal, undeniable principles. Applying those principles to big issues may be complicated, but the concept of freedom is not. When applied consistently, it shows the way to a more harmonious society.
That's beautiful, man. And did you have anything else to plug towards the end?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter, Raeford D. So please, give me a look and a follow, and help kind of, if you like what I'm saying, help amplify it. The more people speak out, and I get it from officers and military veterans, that they reach out to me confidentially and say, thank you for speaking out. I have a duty to do so. I've got to make amends. I cause harm. I have to at least speak out, and I can't really restore the people I've harmed, but I can try to pay it forward. And I've had nothing but positive responses from this. And so help me kind of spread that message. I may be saying the same things as a lot of people in the liberty movement. But, I have that unique position that I was a former cop, and I have some credibility, with certain groups. And so, help me spread that message.
Yeah, and I'd love to get you back on the show again. We're just barely scraping the surface of actually the things I wanted to discuss with you, Raeford.
Right.
Till next time, man, and hopefully it won't be too long.
Thank you for Patrick, and I'm glad you have Liberty Weekly and have started this. Every little bit helps to grow that kind of voluntarist anarchist community and get that word out. Yeah, most definitely. And you're a tremendous asset, man. So thanks again. Thank you, Patrick.